During World War II, the Third Reich made a name for themselves in many ways, often to a horrifying degree. This is also the case for weapon designs, with some of the most absurd weapons in history being drawn up during the 30s and 40s, including massive railway guns and land battleships. For the most part, these designs all focused around one goal: to carry the maximum amount of firepower possible into combat. This included both wonder weapons which were never built, as well as numerous armored vehicle designs which were both drafted and built throughout the war. These include things as early as the Bison up to the Jagdtiger. For today though, we will not be looking at those vehicles, but rather at one which was essentially designed around its main armament, the Sturer Emil. Let me ask you a question. What is something about a tank that makes it instantly recognizable and yet does not affect its performance on the battlefield? You may say it's paint, or maybe what nation created it, but the answer is its name. For example, the Tiger II has become known as the Königstiger or King Tiger, and the Matilda II earned the name Queen of the Desert during the fighting in North Africa. Although the titles I just referred to may seem regal or even imposing in the case of the Tiger II, today's vehicle earned its nickname Sturer Emil or Stubborn Emil in a slightly less glamorous way. Before we get to that though, we need to discuss what led to the creation of this machine. As we've discussed in previous parts of this series, the German designs from the late 30s were largely centered around dealing with fortifications. Obviously, the main tank force was less suited for this role with the weaker armaments of that time, but larger caliber weapons did exist, they just needed a way to transport them. In 1939, this would lead to early designs for a so-called schwere Betonknacker, or heavy concrete buster, with the French fortifications such as the Maginot Line being the primary intended target. Although some designs prior to this had been suggested using the 10.5cm cannon, it was decided instead to utilize the 12.8cm flak to create a new, powerful cannon capable of taking on any current or future fortifications. For this project, the work was split between two firms, with work on the cannon and superstructure going to Rheinmetall and the chassis being assigned to Henschel. The new cannon, known as the 12.8cm Canon L61, would share the recoil cylinders and gun barrel as the flak it was based upon, although the weight of the cannon assembly was reduced from 12 tons to a slightly more reasonable weight of just under 8 metric tons. Like with the FCM36 conversion we covered recently, this would then be mounted in an open-topped superstructure. As the title of this video suggests though, the gun was the primary focus of this tank, and that will become more apparent when we get into the performance of it in combat. Still, even by the end of the war, the 12.8cm gun was the most powerful armament to be mounted on a vehicle. Though it was intended for fortifications at the start, it could defeat any enemy armor at a range of 2 kilometers. With this incredible power and the weight of the gun, the only suitable chassis available at the time was that of the VK-3001. Interestingly, later Allied intelligence would label the photos of the finished vehicle as a German mock-up of a Panther with 8.8cm Pak-43. I guess it goes to show you shouldn't trust every historical document you find. To accommodate the massive 12.8cm gun, the 3001 chassis was lengthened 1.5 meters with reinforcement to the suspension being necessary due to this. Although recoil management was likely one concern, the suspension would have needed improvements regardless, as the original vehicle sat at around 32 tons, while the new Panzerselbstfahrerfette 5, as it was then designated, was estimated at 36 tons when completed. Due to the increased length and weight, an additional road wheel was to be added on each side, as well as stronger torsion bars being added to the last 2 road wheels on each side. The latter of these changes was in direct response to the recoil, as it was done following firing tests where the rocking of the hull was shown to be so great that it was impossible for the gunner to maintain sight on target until after the round had landed. To power this machine, the same 6-cylinder Maybach HL116 was to be used, with the only change being the cooling system being mounted lower. This engine would feed into the same gearbox, with the only change being a lower gear ratio in the track drives to adjust for the longer track length. This gave the vehicle a pathetic top speed of 19.6 kilometers per hour, making it a great contender for a drag race with the equally sluggish Mouse tank. Not only was the speed quite slow, but in the stereotypical German fashion, the engine would prove to be unreliable when the vehicles reached combat. In theory, the Sturer Emil was capable of 25 kilometers per hour, but poor acceleration gave it that sluggish 20 kilometers per hour we saw earlier. When we consider the armor protection of this vehicle, it quickly becomes apparent that this slow speed and increased weight was more the result of the massive cannon than the superstructure. Unlike the original VK3001H hull with 60mm of armor on the front and 50 on the sides, the new protection was decreased to only 30 on the sides, with the front being 50mm. As mentioned earlier, the vehicle was also open-topped, making the overall armor protection fairly low on this vehicle, albeit better than many similar vehicles like the Nashorn. With a role as a bunker buster with the ability to hit targets at longer range, this can be seen as less of an issue, but for such a large vehicle, this did create a large, vulnerable target. It was decided that a 5-man crew would be used to operate this tank, with a driver in the front separated from the remaining 4 crew. You may notice what appears to be a second crew position opposite the drivers on the front of the vehicle. This was in fact a false cabin with a fuel tank sitting beneath it. If you're familiar with this vehicle's portrayal in the game War Thunder, you may question this, as in-game this is the machine gunner's position. From what I can tell, this aspect of the game is completely wrong, as the setup of the loading area clearly would support 2 loaders, and on top of that, the false cabin was later removed from the vehicle. I'm not sure what information they used when working on this particular vehicle either, as they include an optic on the side which clearly is not present on the real vehicles. Definitely a weird mistake which I hope they can correct. As for the remaining 4 crew, they would be positioned in the rear superstructure, acting as the gunner, commander, and 2 loaders. I have also seen the 5th crew member referred to as a radio operator, so he may have performed that role. I personally tend to think he would have at least acted as a loader in combat though, given the radio seems to be positioned closer to the commander. Having a second loader for the 2-piece ammo would also increase the reload speed. Speaking of ammunition, we get to another issue with the design. Despite the relatively large size of the vehicle and its impressive armament, only 15 rounds could be loaded. This meant that the crew could quickly run out of ammunition, but again, this was likely not seen as a concern at first due to the targets being intended as stationary bunkers. This would change when the vehicles were instead pressed into service as tank destroyers. These shells would be stored on the sides of the vehicle, with the projectiles vertically in the rear and the propellant in an enclosed rack to the front of them. Some sources mention the vehicle carrying 18 rounds, but from the interior shots we can clearly see 15 open racks for projectiles and 13 propellant racks. This does beg the question of where the remaining 2 rounds were stored, but despite my best efforts, I cannot seem to find an answer to that. My best guess is that either the 2 remaining spots were not fitted yet, similar to the missing radio, or the additional 2 projectiles were stored elsewhere. In total, 2 of these vehicles would be produced as prototypes, being originally ordered for 1940, but it would not be until March of 1942 when they were finally completed. By this point, their intended role had shifted, with rumors of Soviet super heavy tanks in production, as well as the real encounters with the KV tanks causing legitimate concerns in the German ranks. As a result, these 2 vehicles, now to act as tank destroyers, would put their massive guns to work against the Red Army's tanks. Following their completion and testing, the 2 Sturer Emils would be assigned to the 521st Tank Destroyer Battalion, following in the footsteps of their cousin, the Dicker Max. Over the course of their lives up to this point, the Sturer Emils had been known by quite a long list of different names as shown on screen now. However, they would become known to their crews by the collective Stubborn Emil due to the slow and unreliable nature of the tanks, with one being named Max and the other Moritz after the characters from a German story by Wilhelm Busch. This further hints to the nature of the vehicles, as in the story, the boys are unruly and troublemakers, showing that the tank destroyers did not make life easy for their crews. For all their faults, Max and Moritz seem to have performed well once in combat, with Moritz claimed to have knocked out at least 31 tanks, and Max also claiming some kills, though not nearly as many as his brother. From reports, it seems these vehicles were mainly used at longer range, keeping them both safe from return fire and allowing them to take advantage of their superior firepower. In one of the few documented engagements, Moritz is said to have knocked out a KV tank at a distance of around 1,500 meters, along with multiple T-34s as they tried to recover the damaged tank. The advantage of a mobile chassis to carry the gun is clear in the account by Oberlieutenant Kurt Hildebrandt, which documents that engagement along with others over a 2-day period. It's hard to say for certain the reliability of that information given the one-sided nature of it, but for experimental vehicles, they do seem to have performed fairly well once they were in combat, similar to the Ferdinand. Outside these engagements though, they were clearly a pain in the ass for those assigned to them. In numerous cases, Max is reported as out of action due to engine troubles, and later when Moritz was captured by the Russians, it appears he was also under repair. The crews had constant issues with the low ammo supply and frequent repairs. Aside from the engine, the suspension was also problematic, with the rear road wheels wearing out faster due to the increased weight in the rear. Combine this with the fact that the VK3001 program was long since dead, parts were not exactly easy to come by. Both Sturer Emils were eventually lost following their drive towards Stalingrad, with Max being lost prior to December and Moritz being abandoned not long after, along with other vehicles from the 521st Tank Battalion near Stalingrad. He was later found by the Red Army, who took their prize for study. It seems not much was actually done in terms of testing due to lack of parts to repair the vehicle and no ammunition, but eventually repairs were done and the last Sturer Emil was put on display alongside other captured armor in Gorky Park. Apparently the Americans took an interest in the vehicle at one point, asking to take it for study. As this was the only example of the vehicle though, this request was denied. Today, Moritz is on display at the Kubinka Tank Museum, although sadly the interior has been almost completely removed. Despite being capable of destroying anything they encountered in battle, the story of the Sturer Emil is one of near constant failure. Although they did perform well against the enemy when they did engage them, it was not enough to continue their legacy, with the VK3001 program being put aside in favor of what would eventually become the Tiger tank. The two brothers would be the only vehicles of their kind to be built. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you guys want to check out more of my content, you can pick one of the videos popping up on your screen, or check out my second channel where I'm releasing some gameplay from War Thunder showcasing this vehicle. Links to that and my other social media are in the description as always. I'll see you there.